The morning began like most others. The alarm rang too early, and she reached out to turn it off before it woke the whole room. The small apartment was quiet, except for the sound of traffic outside. She sat up slowly, feeling the tiredness in her body from the long shifts she worked every day. There was no time to rest. Life didn't pause just because someone was exhausted. She washed her face, tied her hair back, and looked at herself in the mirror. There was nothing special about her reflection, just a young woman trying to get through another day. She dressed in her usual clothes and left the apartment before the sun fully rose. The air outside was cool, and the city was already awake. The diner where she worked was not fancy. It was a small place near a busy road, known more for cheap coffee and quick meals than comfort. Still, it paid the bills. She put on her apron, greeted her coworkers, and started her shift. Plates clinked, orders were called out, and the smell of food filled the air. She moved from table to table with practiced ease, smiling even when her feet hurt. Most customers never noticed her beyond their order. Some were polite, some rude, most in a hurry. She had learned not to take things personally. Every tip mattered. Every extra shift helped. She was saving what little she could, though emergencies always seemed to take that money away. By late afternoon, her body felt heavy. Her break came and went quickly. She drank water, stretched her legs, and went back to work. As evening approached, the diner grew quieter. Her final shift ended just after sunset. She cleaned her section, clocked out, and stepped outside. Normally, she would head straight home. But that night was different. A neighbor from her building had been taken to the hospital earlier that day. An older woman who lived alone. They weren't close, but she checked on her sometimes. It felt wrong not to visit. The hospital was not far, so she walked. The lights inside were bright and harsh. The smell of disinfectant filled the air. She asked for directions and followed the signs. The halls were busy, people moving quickly, voices low but tense. As she waited near the emergency area, she noticed something unusual. Doctors and nurses were rushing back and forth. Their faces were serious. A sense of urgency hung in the air. She overheard bits of conversation. Words like critical, rare blood, and time running out. She sat quietly, unsure what was happening. A nurse walked past, frustration clear in her voice, as she spoke to another staff member. They needed a specific blood type. They had tried everything. The blood bank was short. Time was slipping away. She felt a strange pull in her chest. She stood up slowly and approached the desk. Her voice was soft when she spoke. She said she might be able to help. The nurse looked surprised, then cautious. Questions followed. Paperwork. Tests. She hesitated for a moment. She had worked all day. She was tired. She had never donated blood before. But someone's life was on the line. She thought about how fragile life was, how easily things could change. She nodded and agreed. They guided her into a small room. She sat on the chair as they prepared everything. Her heart beat fast. She felt nervous, but she tried not to show it. A nurse spoke gently, explaining the process. She listened, her hands resting on her lap. As the needle went in, she looked away. The room was quiet except for the sound of machines. She thought about nothing in particular, just breathing, just staying calm. Minutes passed. Her arm felt strange, but manageable. She wondered who the patient was. She didn't ask. It didn't matter. All that mattered was that someone might live because of this. When it was over, they thanked her. She felt lightheaded as she stood. They gave her juice and told her to rest for a while. She sat there, sipping slowly, feeling weak but peaceful. She never saw the patient. She didn't know his age, his face, or his story. She didn't know how important he was to the world. To her, he was just someone who needed help. After a short while, she left the hospital. The night air felt cold against her skin. She walked home slowly, her steps careful. Her arm ached slightly, but she didn't mind. Back in her apartment, she lay down on her bed without even changing clothes. Her body felt drained, but her mind was calm. She stared at the ceiling, replaying the day in her head. Work, the hospital. The choice she made. She didn't tell anyone what she had done. There was no need. She wasn't looking for praise. She just hoped the person would survive. Across town, in a private hospital room, machines beeped softly. Doctors worked carefully, using the blood that had arrived just in time. The patient's condition stabilized. A life hung between moments and slowly pulled back. A doctor mentioned the donor briefly, saying a stranger had stepped in when no one else could. The patient, barely conscious, heard those words and held on to them. He didn't know who she was. He didn't know where she came from. But someone had saved his life, and she, unaware of the ripple she had just created, drifted into sleep, ready to wake up the next morning and return to her simple life. Not knowing that this single quiet decision over the next morning, she woke up feeling a little stiff. Her arm throbbed slightly where the needle had been, but she barely noticed. The body recovers quickly after small sacrifices, she thought, stretching under the thin blanket. She had no idea that her quiet act of kindness had already made a difference. Life in her apartment went on as usual. Breakfast was quick, coffee strong, and the clock ticked toward another long day. At the diner, the routine resumed. Orders, plates, coffee, the soft chatter of regular customers, the clinking of utensils. She moved from table to table, sometimes smiling when customers left, sometimes nodding to herself quietly. No one at the diner knew about what she had done at the hospital the night before. She didn't tell them, and they didn't ask. Life often passed like this, quietly, without recognition. She worked her shift, and then went home again, carrying groceries, checking her small mailbox for bills and letters. Nothing unusual. The night was quiet, the city lights shimmering on the streets. But somewhere not far from her, a man was waking slowly, his eyes adjusting to the bright hospital room. He was weak, fragile even, a shell compared to the powerful presence he normally carried. Machines beeped softly, nurses whispered words of reassurance, and his mind struggled to remember exactly what had happened. He had been told he needed blood. That alone had been alarming. But the doctors explained the urgency, and then the relief when help arrived. A stranger, someone he had never met, had stepped forward without question. That simple act had saved him from the brink. He lay in the bed, still weak, but alive. That life-saving blood coursed through his veins. He closed his eyes and tried to imagine the person who had done it. He didn't know her, her age, or anything about her life. But she had chosen to give when she had no reason to. It struck him deeply. Back in her small apartment, she barely thought about it. Her mind was full of schedules, bills, and the small worries of everyday survival. She thought little about the hospital after she left. To her, it was a momentary choice, just doing what seemed right. But for someone else, it had been a turning point. Days passed. She continued working the diner. The customers, the plates, the tips, the endless cleaning, it was all the same. Her friends and coworkers knew her as reliable, cheerful, hard-working, but no one suspected the quiet courage she had shown the other night. Meanwhile, in the hospital, the man recovered slowly. He was still weak, but his body was healing. Nurses and doctors watched him closely, amazed at the resilience. And in the back of his mind, he kept thinking about the donor. How many people would act without knowing who would benefit? How many would simply walk away, thinking it was not their problem? He could not forget the kindness, and he wanted to see her. At first, it was just a curiosity, a need to thank the person. But it became more than that. There was something about her courage, her quiet bravery, that captured his attention. Not her looks, not her social status, not her job, just the essence of who she was. One afternoon, the hospital staff approached him carefully. They reminded him that the donor's identity was unknown. She had given anonymously. He felt a small disappointment, but also a strange sense of respect for her choice. She had acted without seeking reward, without asking for recognition. That in itself made her remarkable. At the diner, life continued. She did not know that she had become the topic of whispered admiration somewhere in a quiet hospital room. She smiled at customers, wiped tables, poured coffee, and carried trays, all without realizing the ripple she had created. A nurse mentioned her again in passing, speaking about a woman who had donated blood at an unusual hour, who had not wanted to give her name. The man listened carefully, and his curiosity grew. He wanted to meet her, not because she had saved his life alone, but because the choice she had made reflected a character he had rarely seen. Weeks passed, and he began to regain his strength. Slowly, he moved from the bed to short walks in the hospital corridor. He kept asking nurses questions about the donor, about who she might be. No one knew. She remained a quiet mystery, a fleeting figure whose courage had changed the course of someone's life. Meanwhile, she returned to the same routine every day. She worked, she cooked, she cleaned. She had little time to think beyond what was immediately in front of her. And yet, there was a subtle satisfaction she felt, though she could not explain why. She had acted without thinking, and for some reason, she felt that the world was slightly better because of it. The man, from his room, began to imagine what she might look like, what her life might be like. He thought about the simple things: her apartment, her morning coffee, the way she had moved through the hospital with quiet determination. He wondered how someone could possess such courage without seeking fame or reward. It fascinated him. Then one day, she happened to visit another friend in the hospital. She walked past the rooms, smiled at the nurses she recognized, and spoke quietly with those she knew. She did not expect anything out of this visit, just kindness in return for kindness. He noticed her immediately. Though he could not approach her fully yet, he saw the same posture, the same way she moved with purpose and calm. His heart raced slightly. Could this be her? Could this be the woman who had unknowingly saved his life? He waited. He asked the nurses to watch carefully, to tell him if she returned. He did not want to frighten her or make her uncomfortable. He only wanted a chance to say thank you, to understand the person who had done what most would not. She did not notice him at first. Her attention was on a different part of the ward, helping a friend, making sure everything was in order. But she felt an odd sense of peace, an unexplainable calm, as if her quiet actions had created a small ripple of change she could not yet see. The days continued, and their paths nearly crossed more than once. Simple gestures, a shared look, a nod in passing. Yet neither spoke. She had no idea he was there, and he had not yet found the courage to approach her directly. At home, she would sometimes think about the hospital, the urgency, the fear, and the relief. She thought about the person she had helped, imagining him alive, walking, breathing, without fully knowing who he was. There was a quiet pride in her heart, not for recognition, but because she had acted with her whole self. He, too, reflected. He had been saved by someone whose life was very different from his own, yet whose courage outshone many of his peers. He wondered about fairness, about chance, and about the strange ways the world connects people without warning. Their stories continued side by side, separate but intertwined. Two lives that had touched in a fleeting moment, a choice made in quiet bravery, a ripple that would grow in ways neither yet understood. The waitress continued her simple daily routine, unaware of the admiration and curiosity she had sparked. And the billionaire, recovering, thought constantly about the person who had reminded him of the humanity that money and power could never buy. The world moved on around them, but in their small, separate spheres, the connection lingered. It was invisible to everyone else, unnoticed in the rush of life. But it existed, waiting, quietly, for the moment when their paths would fully meet again. OULD, change everything. Weeks passed, and life continued its steady rhythm. She moved through her days at the diner, each shift blending into the next. Customers came and went, orders were taken, and the clatter of plates and silverware filled the small space. Her feet were sore by the end of the day, and her hands smelled faintly of coffee and soap, but she did not mind. She was used to hard work and the quiet satisfaction it brought. Her life was simple. She cooked, cleaned, paid bills, and occasionally met a friend for a short walk in the evening. She did not expect excitement or drama. Her choices were small, everyday decisions, each one adding up to a life she managed carefully, step by step. But behind the simplicity, there was a quiet strength, a resilience built from years of challenges. Meanwhile, across the city, he recovered. His days were filled with medical checkups, light exercise, and quiet reflection. The machines that had kept him alive now beeped softly in the background, their urgency replaced by the gentle rhythm of healing. He was grateful, yet unsettled. There was a sense of incompleteness in his mind, a curiosity that would not fade. He was not used to this feeling. In his world, decisions were calculated, and people were measured by their usefulness. But the memory of her act stayed with him. She had acted without thought of reward or status. She had saved his life simply because it was the right thing to do. That had left a mark he could not ignore. He began asking questions, quietly, to nurses and staff he trusted. Was she young or old? Did she live nearby? Did she work or study? Every detail he could gather was small, almost meaningless, but to him it became a map of someone he wanted to know. He did not wish to intrude, but he wished to understand the person who had shown such courage. Back at the diner, she continued her routine, unaware of the impact her action had created. Her co-workers knew her as dependable, cheerful, and hardworking, but they did not know the story of the previous week. She did not tell them, and she had no reason to. To her, it had been a simple choice. To someone else, it had been life-saving. She sometimes thought about the hospital, about the patient whose life she had touched. Not often, and never in detail. It was not a story she needed to relive, only a quiet memory that brought a subtle sense of pride. She did not know who he was, or that he was different from anyone she had ever known. To her, he was a stranger, and that was enough. For him, however, it became more than a memory. The thought of her persisted. He began noticing the small details of his own life that now seemed dull or empty, without the reminder of courage he had witnessed. He realized that life could change in an instant, and that people's choices, small and unseen, could carry tremendous weight. He started leaving the hospital room for short walks, taking the stairs instead of the elevator, moving quietly through corridors in search of something he could not yet name. Every time he passed someone who resembled her, he felt a spark of hope. He tried to imagine her face, her voice, the way she might smile. He imagined her walking, laughing, working, living a life very different from his own. The contrast between their worlds was striking. She lived simply, focused on daily survival, unaware of the influence she had had. He lived surrounded by wealth and power, accustomed to control, but powerless in the face of someone's selfless choice. The disparity fascinated him. He had never encountered a person who acted purely from the heart, without thinking of consequences or reward. One day, She had a small emergency with a friend who was admitted to the hospital. She went there out of concern, carrying her usual quiet calm and gentle presence. She walked through the same corridors she had visited before, unaware of the man recovering nearby. Their paths almost crossed several times, each moment passing unnoticed, each glance unrecognized. He watched her, careful not to startle her. He noticed the way she moved, steady and composed, even when concerned or tired. He saw how she interacted with others, patient, kind, without expectation. It confirmed what he had imagined. This woman, this stranger, held a strength that could not be measured by wealth or position. It was innate, unassuming, and rare. At the diner, her life carried on with its familiar patterns. Orders were taken, plates cleared, customers smiled and left. She cleaned her station, refilled coffee pots, and counted tips, always aware that every little bit mattered. Life was about managing the small things, and she did it well. He began to plan, cautiously. He wanted to know her, but he did not want to disrupt her life. He wanted to understand her choices, to see her in her natural environment. He thought about how he could approach her without overwhelming her, without making her feel that his wealth or status mattered. It was not easy. His world operated on different rules, where influence and power often dictated actions. She was untouched by any of that, and he admired it. As days turned into weeks, he asked nurses and staff to observe quietly. He learned more about her routines, the way she interacted with others, the small kindnesses she extended without thought of recognition. Every story he heard only deepened his respect and curiosity. She had saved his life, yes, but more importantly, she reminded him of what he had forgotten, the power of simple, selfless acts. She, meanwhile, remained unaware. She focused on her own life, her own challenges, the small victories of daily survival. She had no idea that a life had been saved because of her. She did not expect a reward or acknowledgement. She only knew she had done what seemed right in the moment. Their lives were running in parallel, close but unconnected. One world was simple and grounded, the other wealthy and controlled. Yet the invisible thread of that moment at the hospital pulled them toward each other, silently, patiently, waiting for the right time to be noticed. One evening, after a long day at the diner, she walked home slowly, the city lights flickering on the wet streets. She thought briefly of the hospital, of the person she had helped. She did not know he had survived, did not know the life she had touched. And yet, there was a small warmth in her chest, a satisfaction she could not fully explain. He, in his hospital room, watched quietly from afar. The thought of her persisted like a quiet echo. He imagined meeting her, talking to her, learning her story, not as a patient to a stranger, not as a billionaire to a waitress, but as one human to another, equally complex, equally valuable. That thought became a small hope, growing quietly each day. The weeks continued. They passed near each other without meeting. Yet in the spaces between, in the quiet moments, their lives began to intertwine. One had acted without thought, and the other had observed without interference. Both had changed subtly but irrevocably. And somewhere in the city, their paths were moving closer, guided by an unseen force of coincidence and choice. What had begun as a small act of kindness was now preparing the ground for a meeting neither could have anticipated. A connection that would bridge the worlds they had each built. Separate yet converging, life moved on in its quiet, steady way. She continued her work at the diner, serving customers, cleaning tables, and taking orders. The routine was familiar, comforting in its predictability. Her days were long, her feet tired by the end, but she carried on, knowing that every shift meant bills paid and food on the table. She thought little of the hospital visit from weeks before, focusing instead on the immediate demands of life and work. Meanwhile, He was adjusting to life outside the bed that had been a near prison. Slowly, he regained strength, moving with care and paying attention to the limits of his body. He continued observing her from afar, learning about the life she lived without her ever knowing. He noticed the small acts of kindness she extended to those around her, a smile to a cashier, patience with an elderly customer, or a gentle word to a child who had dropped a toy. Her world was simple, focused on daily survival and modest comforts. His world, in contrast, was one of influence, wealth, and constant attention. Yet he found himself drawn more to her simplicity than to the power he wielded. He began to reflect on his own life, realizing that money and position could not purchase the qualities she possessed naturally. Integrity, kindness, courage, these were priceless, and he had just witnessed them firsthand. He wanted to approach her, but he hesitated. He did not want to overwhelm her or make her feel that his status mattered. She had acted selflessly, without thought of reward. To approach her now as a billionaire might undermine that purity. He struggled to find a way to connect with her honestly, without letting his world intrude upon hers. She continued her life unaware. Her routines carried her through long days and brief nights of rest. She interacted with people politely, helping when she could, but never expecting anything in return. Life had taught her to value what was real and present, rather than chasing recognition or reward. Her heart was generous, but measured, careful not to give too much of herself to the wrong places. One afternoon, a small crisis at the hospital drew her back. A friend needed support, and she went willingly, carrying her natural calm and gentle presence. As she moved through the corridors, she did not see him at first. He, however, noticed her immediately. The subtle movements, the way she carried herself, the quiet confidence, it was unmistakable. He realized instantly that this was the woman who had unknowingly changed his life. He watched quietly, careful not to disturb her. He wanted to observe her as she truly was, without the filter of awareness that she might be under if she knew he was watching. He noticed how she interacted naturally with others, offering kindness without thought, patience without complaint. It reaffirmed everything he had imagined. Her character was rare and genuine. Days went by, and he began to find small ways to understand her better. He asked hospital staff to relay minor information about her, nothing intrusive, just enough to build a picture. He learned about her dedication, her reliability, and the quiet strength she showed in managing her life. Each piece of information deepened his admiration and curiosity. She, on the other hand, remained grounded. Her focus was on her own responsibilities, on the people she cared about, and on the life she had built through effort and perseverance. She had no idea that someone's life had been saved by her, or that this person now watched her from a distance with respect and growing fascination. One evening, after a particularly long shift, she walked home, thinking about the small tasks that awaited her: laundry, cooking, paying bills. She felt a familiar fatigue in her bones, but it was accompanied by a quiet satisfaction. She had acted rightly when she could, and that was enough. She did not know that her small choice had created an impression so profound that it lingered in someone else's mind every day. He watched her with careful consideration. He understood that approaching her recklessly could undo everything. He wanted her to see him as a person, not as a figure of wealth or power. He reflected on how to bridge the gap between their worlds without making her feel compromised or uncomfortable. It was a delicate balance, requiring patience, observation, and respect. Over time, he began to see small opportunities to connect without intrusion. Perhaps a chance encounter at a public place, a moment where their paths might naturally cross. He studied these moments, considering every possibility with care. He did not want to rush, knowing that genuine connection could not be forced. She remained unaware, moving through her world with quiet determination. Every day was a mixture of work, minor challenges, and the small joys she allowed herself. The taste of a favorite meal, a friendly conversation with a regular customer, a brief walk in the evening air. Her life was ordinary in the eyes of the world, yet remarkable in its consistency, integrity, and strength. He thought often about the contrast between their lives. How simple, yet meaningful, her existence seemed compared to the complexity and pressure of his own. He admired her for it, envied her for the authenticity she maintained without effort. He realized that while he could provide comfort, resources, and security, what she valued most were qualities that could not be bought or arranged. Weeks continued, and he refined his approach. He knew that honesty would be key. When he finally spoke with her, he wanted it to be sincere, free from pretense or expectation. He wanted her to see him as a person, not as a title or figure of wealth. He planned carefully, considering the timing, the place, and the way he would introduce himself. She continued her routine, blissfully unaware that her life was about to intersect with his in a way that would test her beliefs, her values, and her understanding of trust. Her choices, made quietly and without expectation, had created a path that neither of them could fully predict. The invisible thread that connected them grew stronger, pulling them closer together. What had begun as a simple act of kindness was now shaping the circumstances for a meeting that would challenge both of them. The story of their lives, once separate, was moving toward a convergence that neither could ignore. In her world, the diner, the streets, the apartment all remained the same. Yet in the spaces between her ordinary days, something extraordinary was preparing. In his world, the hospital room, the quiet observation, the careful planning all led toward a single purpose: to meet her, to acknowledge her courage, and to honor the choice that had unknowingly changed his life. Both lived their lives fully, unaware of the exact moment when their worlds would collide. One had acted selflessly, without thought or reward. The other had observed patiently, learning the value of character beyond wealth. And now, as time moved steadily forward, the stage was being set for a moment of truth, honesty, and revelation that would challenge assumptions, build trust, and possibly form the beginning of a new chapter in both their lives. The day finally arrived when their paths were set to meet. She had finished her shift at the diner and decided to stop by the hospital, checking on a friend who had recently been admitted. It was an ordinary visit, part of her life that revolved around care, kindness, and small responsibilities. She moved through the corridors with her usual calm and natural grace. Unaware of the eyes that watched her from a distance, he noticed her immediately. The familiar movements, the way she carried herself, the quiet strength that he had admired from afar, all of it was more vivid in person than he had imagined. He felt a rush of emotions: gratitude, curiosity, and a desire to connect honestly. He knew that this moment would change everything, and he wanted to approach it with care. She paused at the nurse's station, asking questions, offering help, and exchanging polite words. Her focus was on her friend, not realizing that the man who had been saved by her blood was standing just across the hall, waiting patiently. He took a deep breath, rehearsing the words in his mind, wanting them to sound genuine, simple, and free from any hint of influence or expectation. Finally, the moment came. He stepped forward, careful not to startle her. His voice was steady, kind, and human, as if he were speaking to someone he had known all his life. He introduced himself simply, saying that he had been the patient she had helped. He explained that her choice had saved his life, that her courage and kindness had left a deep impression, and that he wanted to meet her properly, not as a wealthy person, but as someone who owed a debt of gratitude. She froze for a moment, surprised and unsure. Her mind raced with questions. Who was he really? Why was he here? Could she trust him? She had never thought of her action as extraordinary, yet here was someone expressing profound gratitude. She took a cautious step forward, listening carefully as he continued. He spoke honestly about the impact of her act, how it had changed his perspective on life, and how it had inspired him to value human connection over material wealth. He explained that he had watched her from afar, not to intrude, but to understand her better. He admitted that he admired her for her integrity, her kindness, and the simple humanity that she embodied. She listened quietly, absorbing every word. Her natural instinct was caution, but she sensed honesty in his tone. She realized that he was not trying to impress her with money or power. He was acknowledging her as a person, not as a means to an end. That distinction mattered deeply to her. Slowly, she allowed herself to respond. She thanked him for the words, explaining that she had only acted out of instinct, never expecting anything in return. She spoke of her belief that everyone should help when they can, that life was fragile, and kindness mattered more than recognition. Her words were simple, heartfelt, and grounded in truth. He nodded, absorbing her perspective, realizing that her humility and sincerity were exactly what he had hoped to find. He understood that the connection between them could only grow if built on mutual respect and understanding, free from assumptions or expectations. Over the next few weeks, they spent more time together, slowly building trust and understanding. They shared meals, conversations, and quiet moments, learning about each other's lives, struggles, and values. He respected her boundaries, never overwhelming her with his world, and she allowed herself to see him as a person, not just the man who had been saved by her blood. She learned about his life, the responsibilities he carried, and the pressures he faced. He shared his thoughts about life, kindness, and the lessons he had learned from the experience of being saved. She listened without judgment, offering her perspective from a different, simpler life. Grounded in everyday challenges and joys, their friendship deepened naturally, built on mutual respect and genuine interest. Neither felt the need to rush or force the relationship. They found comfort in shared laughter, small adventures, and honest conversations. Each moment reinforced the idea that true connection transcended wealth, status, and circumstance. One evening, he invited her to a quiet dinner, not in a luxurious setting, but somewhere that felt intimate and comfortable. He explained that he wanted to celebrate her courage, her humanity, and the bond that had formed between them. She accepted, feeling a mixture of curiosity, cautious excitement, and a sense of peace. During the dinner, he spoke openly about his feelings. He acknowledged that her selfless act had sparked a profound change in him, inspiring him to see life differently, to value people for who they are rather than what they have. He expressed a desire to continue building a connection with her, based on honesty, respect, and shared values. She listened, touched by his words. She realized that their bond was not about wealth or obligation, but about human connection, courage, and trust. She felt a deep sense of recognition and respect for him. Seeing the genuine person behind the status and resources. After dinner, they walked together under the evening sky, talking quietly, sharing thoughts, and enjoying the simple pleasure of each other's company. The city lights reflected in their eyes, a subtle reminder that life, in all its complexity, had brought them together through a single selfless act. As the night ended, he finally expressed his intention. He wanted to be part of her life, not as a benefactor, not as a wealthy figure, but as a companion who respected her, admired her, and wished to share a life built on honesty and kindness. He proposed a future together, grounded in mutual understanding and genuine affection. She paused, considering everything. Her mind weighed caution, trust, and the reality of their different worlds. Yet her heart recognized the truth in his words, the sincerity in his actions, and the respect he had shown. She saw an opportunity for a connection built on genuine human values, not material influence. Slowly, she smiled and agreed. It was not a decision made lightly, but one rooted in understanding, trust, and the recognition of shared values. She accepted the proposal, aware that life had a way of connecting people in unexpected ways, and that sometimes courage and kindness could lead to extraordinary outcomes. From that moment, their lives began a new chapter. They continued to learn from each other, support each other, and navigate the complexities of their worlds together. She remained grounded in her simplicity and kindness, and he continued to grow, inspired by her integrity and humanity. Their connection became a testament to the power of selfless acts, the value of genuine character, and the unpredictable, beautiful ways that life brings people together. In the end, it was not wealth, status, or power that mattered. It was courage, kindness, and the willingness to act when it was needed most. A single act of giving had changed two lives, creating a bond that would endure, reminding them that the most meaningful relationships are built on trust, respect, and the shared understanding of what truly matters in life.